Hello and welcome back to another video, and boy am I excited about this video. So today we're doing another holiday Grinch collaboration. Now last year Alexis, Cassandra Art and we did a Grinch collaboration, and I did this one using alcohol markers and colored pencils. So I'll go ahead and link that video down below, but I am so glad that Becky Tregear Art is joining us this year. We're all doing new Grinch artwork for this year, and I'll go ahead and link all of their videos down below. But now for the grand reveal, well, I guess you probably already saw it in the thumbnail, but this is my artwork for this month. So this was done with watercolors, and I just love how this turned out. Now, I don't usually paint a lot of like detailed little things, but I had a lot of fun painting this. Now this video did take about 4 hours, and you can find the real-time version available on my Patreon. I will link that down below. I have this one there, and I also have the one that I did from last year available. But I had so much fun painting this, and I hope you guys enjoy watching this video, and let's just get right into it. So I've gone ahead and used my Winsor and Newton tinted masking fluid here, and I masked out the areas that I wanted to protect while we do the background. And then I go ahead and just wet the whole paper, including the areas that I'm not going to put paint right now because I want the whole page to start drying at the same rate, so I don't want to get any buckles. I'm going ahead and mixing up indigo now for the background, and I want to have sort of a gradient in the background, so I want it to be darker at the top and lighter at the bottom. And because I'm going to be going in and putting some trees wet and wet, I'm not going to bother doing anything fancy with the background. Then while the paint's still wet, I go ahead and add a little bit of green to my indigo, and I'm starting to put some distant trees in the hill. Now my paint and my paper is still a little bit wet, so they're going to fade out and blend into the background a little bit, and that's what I want. So as the paper's drying, I just keep layering up on the trees, and I add a couple more. And as the paper dries, your trees are going to look like they're a little bit closer to the foreground because they'll be a little bit darker and they won't be blending into the background as much, if that makes sense. You could also start adding a little bit more paint and a little bit less water to the paint that you're using, and that will help it spread less on your paper as well. Now you want to make sure your paper's not too wet when you're doing this, or your paint is just going to explode right out. So you want to kind of watch when that shininess of the paper starts to go away. If you're enjoying this video, then be sure to hit the like button. It really does help my channel out, and subscribe for more watercolor tutorials. Then I let the paper dry completely, and I want to put in a nice big tree here on the foreground on the right hand side, just to bring a little bit of attention there because there's a lot going on the left hand side with the characters. So I put a tree in there, and I'm making this one a little bit more detailed than our further back trees. Then I grab my P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, and I'm going to use this to put some snow on top of the branches. Now I want to make sure that it's going on top of the branches and not under them, and this is also going to help you to define your branches. So if you're having a really hard time creating realistic looking trees, then going in with something like this just to help separate those branches out will really help you. Now I also went ahead and watered that down, and then I'm applying that to the trees more further in the background because I want there to be snow on them as well, but I don't want it to be as opaque as our front tree here, or that's going to bring them more to the foreground. And again, I want those faded off into the distance. For the ground and the hill that's a little bit closer to us, I wanted to differentiate it from the background. So I use that indigo for the darker areas, but I also pull in a little bit of my cobalt teal, and that's just going to help brighten it up a little bit. And then I start mixing up a red for the bag here, and I want the bag to stand out a little bit from the red of the Grinch's clothes. So I'm using my Winsor red, but I add in just a little bit of green to it, just to kind of darken it a little bit and mute it, just so it's slightly different from his clothes. But we will go ahead and do a couple of layers because it did end up drying a little bit light. And so I will glaze over some more of that Winsor red. And then I just mix a little bit more green and maybe a bit of my neutral tint to create my shadow areas. But as you'll see in a second, I did glaze over another layer of just the Winsor red, and that will bring the shadow area and the main color of the bag a little bit closer together, because I felt the shadows were a little bit too dark compared to the regular color. So you'll see how it kind of blends a little bit more now. Now I'm starting to work on all these little fun little presents and candy canes and things that are inside the bag. Now I will include the reference photo down below for you guys, and I did change it a little bit, so I have included my line art available for my Patreons if you want to follow. But in the reference photo they have a few different things in the bag, but I kind of did my own drawing there. But I'm just going ahead and choosing the colors that I've got. So I've got Winsor red, that cobalt teal, a little bit of sap green, and my deep sap green, and that really light green that you see there next to the blue. That's the permanent green light from Grumbacher. I thought this green would be perfect for the Grinch because it's a really vibrant green, and I don't have any green like this in my collection of watercolors at all. And I really like this color, so I may end up adding it into a palette at some time. But I'm trying to keep these colors together. I think I've also got a little bit of the burnt sienna there with a bit of transparent orange in it. And then that warmer yellow is my new gamboge. So these are all the colors that I'm going to use for the painting, including the indigo that I used in the background. And I don't want these little presents and things to be super detailed, so I'm just doing a little layer, and then I'm taking a little bit of paint off just to create a few little highlights, because I want our main characters to stand out. And for the garland and the tree, I just laid down a little bit of my sap green, and then when that was dry, I went into a few little areas and laid down a little bit of my deep sap green just to create some shadowing. Now I'm starting to work on the Grinch's clothes, and you can see how that bright Winsor red just pops from the bag. It's a lot more vibrant, whereas I muted down the red that we used on the bag. And then I use a little bit of neutral tint and the red to do the shadowing on his clothes. And I'm using that shadow color to do the bag there as well, because I want that to be a little bit darker. And this is where I'm going in with that permanent green light from Grumbacher to do the Grinch. And then I just use a little bit of my deep sap green mixed with that, and that's what I'm using for my shadow color. Now the permanent green light, I think it's a semi-opaque color. It doesn't say on the tubing here, so I'm gonna have to look it up online, but I would say it's more semi-opaque, because I did do one more layer of this green over top, because I felt like the shadows on his face were standing out a little bit too much like the bag. So I went over another layer, and I felt like it just became a little too opaque there. And I'm going ahead and using the indigo mixed with my neutral tint to do his shoes. And this is where you see that second layer on his face, and I feel like it got a little bit too dark, so I do glaze another layer over the rest of him just to make it a little more similar. Now for Max here, I'm using that burnt sienna and transparent orange combination, and then I'm using a little bit of sepia to get that chocolate brown tones. Now this is where I wish I would have stopped with him. I really like how this first layer came out, but I decided to go back in and add a little bit more darks to him, and he got way too dark. However, this was a really good teaching opportunity over on Patreon, because I go ahead and show you how you can take a scrubber brush and lift some of that pigment off, and we're going to get some of our highlights back, but you will see that in a minute. Now this is where I'm glazing that green color over everything again, and I felt like he just became a little too dark. And this is where I did that second layer on Max of just glazing over a little bit more of that burnt sienna and orange mixture. Now he does look a lot darker on camera than he did in person. And then I'm just using my deep sap green for the eyes, and I think I use sepia for Max's eyes. And then I take a little bit of that cobalt teal and indigo, and I'm using that for the shadows in the snow underneath. Now we will go ahead and do a little bit of the bleed proof white over that to create some actual snow, but this is sort of the shadowing underneath. And then here you can see I'm glazing another layer of red over that bag just to make it a little bit punchier in color still, but it still stands out from his clothes. Now this is where I'm taking a little bit of the cobalt teal and indigo, and I'm just creating a little bit of texture in the white areas. So I'm creating little fur markings, but again, you don't have to do a whole lot. And this is where I'm showing how to take that scrubber brush and scrub up some areas on max. Now, this works a lot better if you have a harder brush like a scrubber brush. If you have a softer brush, you're not really going to be able to lift a whole lot off. And what you want to do is dip your brush into some water, dab it off just a little bit. It's got to be wet enough, and you want your paint and paper to be super dry. And then you're just going to scrub the area off that you want. Now, you do want to be mindful of what paper you're using to do this. This is a 100% cotton paper. If you're using a cheaper student grade paper, you may not be able to scrub at it so much. You may end up tearing the paper. But if you're using a decent quality paper, you should be able to scrub away at it and then add a little bit more paint. Now, this is where I'm going back in with that bleed proof white, and I just want to go around all of the white areas and create those little white fluffy pieces off all of his like hat and mitts and around his sweater. And I'm taking a very small brush. I think this is a size 2 or a size 4, and I'm watering the bleed proof white down enough so it's still going to be opaque, but that I can get little wispy lines with it. And then I use this to put in a little bit of snow underneath the Grinch and Max as well. And then just a few little highlights here and there. In the reference photo that I was using, there wasn't a whole lot of stark highlights. So at this point, I'm just looking at my artwork and deciding what areas that I want to add it to, and any little things that I want to tweak or anything that I want to darken up or change. I think we end up changing one of the colors of the present at one time because it was blending into the background a little bit too much. And I just want to say a big thank you to Alexis Cassandra Art and Becky Tregear Art for doing this collaboration with me. I had so much fun doing this painting, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. Again, if you want to paint along with me in real time for all of my tutorials that you see here on YouTube, then I will go ahead and link my Patreon down below. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next one.